Welcome to Marketing Unpacked, the media platform for deeper brand and marketing insights. Today's guest is Mr. Andy Weiss, a senior marketer based in the US. He has held positions, account director, a senior vice president of marketing, as well as global director of marketing. So a very experienced marketing expert. And we're very glad to have you on today, Mr. Weiss. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Andy.
Yes, you are. You are. And Andy is perfect, so we can keep it casual.
Great stuff. Thank you very much for joining us today. And just to, an opportunity to get a sense of who you are as a marketer and where it all began. I find that getting a sense of where it all started and how somebody got to where they are is always just very useful. So you started your career by studying communications and theater, and then I see later on you did an MBA in finance and strategic management. Did you always intend to end up in marketing, or did you kind of fall into it as far as your studies are concerned?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a little of both. So I grew up, the way I like to tell the story is I grew up in a household where one of the houses that we had growing up, my dad had a darkroom for black and white photography. And I fell in love with photography as kind of part of that. And for me, photography's always had kind of two components, one being the image capture side of it. And what do you put in the frame? What's the perspective? What's the angle? And for me, that's kind of the storytelling side of it. And then but it's not done once you capture that image. Back in the day, you'd go into the dark room and develop the film and expose it to light and chemicals. And this day and age, it's about digital and process and optimization and things, and now AI. But there's some magic that can happen in terms of processing the image and bringing those two things together. You can create some really cool images. And for me, that was kind of my entree into kind of this world of visual arts and communications. And I originally set out to get into film. I had an internship I went to undergrad, made movies in college, and had an internship in Hollywood and went down that path and came back from that feeling like it wasn't necessarily talent that got you ahead. It was who you knew and a whole host of other things. And so I was a little bit jaded. And so I started looking for other related type industries and found advertising as part of that. And through knocking on doors, and the economy wasn't great at the time when I was graduating and looking for work, but talked to a lot of people, knocked on a lot of doors, and had the good fortune of landing my first role in advertising at an agency that it was a creative boutique, where it wasn't about the strategic side of the business. It was about creating great advertising. And I learned a lot about advertising and storytelling and the difference between, what made really good advertising. And that was a phenomenal foundation for kind of the storytelling or the advertising and marketing side of the equation. The business schools part came in later when I realized that, I was not on the creative side. I was on the business side. I was on the account management side of the business. And all of my clients, or a lot of my clients, were doing other things, and marketing was a sliver, or advertising was a sliver of what they did. And I really wanted to understand the larger piece of the pie and how advertising kind of fit into that part of their world. And so that's why I went back to school, kind of to pick up that skill set. So great question, but it was not my, hey, I woke up one day and said, I want to be an ad person.
How important you felt that time at the ad agency was. And I asked that in light of the fact that a lot of marketers may not have necessarily spent some time at an ad agency, and at the same time, some agency people have never been on the client side. And I find that people who have not been on either of those sides sometimes lack a little component in terms of the understanding of what is most important to the other side. So from a marketing point of view, especially coming from the creative kind of background, so how do you find that that distinction between those two areas?
You are spot on in terms of the disconnect, and that's part of the reason why I made the transition from agency side to client side, because I felt like agencies were becoming more and more marginalized. And it evolved during the course of my career. Like, agencies went from having massive retainers and doing all kinds of work in the on the heels of Mad Men and that world. And some of the people that I worked with, much more senior than I, were still part of that era. And so I got to see and hear those stories and interact with some really cool people. People that the story goes that the Gatorade Be Like Mike commercial was written on a cocktail napkin by one of my former colleagues back at a different agency. But so that kind of evolution of advertising and marketing and having a focus on the metrics side of it, I think particularly on the agency side, kind of got accelerated with the introduction of digital, and it brought direct response to the forefront. And I think it's really important, regardless of what side of the equation you're on, is that you become continue to become a student and continue to learn and educate yourself on what makes, if you're on the marketing side, what makes good advertising and what makes good communications, and be a student of that. Study copywriter, study the ads that you like and that speak to you, and well, why did those work, and kind of dissect them from that standpoint. If you're on the agency side, spend time understanding your client's business, and how do they make money, why do they make money, what's most important to them. And the more time you spend doing that, the better your relationship's going to be with those clients, the better the agency's relationship is going to be, the better your work's going to be, et cetera, et cetera. And each one may open up opportunities for you on the other side of the fence. And that's in part how I was able to bridge that gap. So
100%. I mean, one of the best agencies I ever worked for, the CEO, the first question he always asked in our weekly status meetings with the client was, how are sales doing? And it was by far one of the best agencies that I worked for, one of the most profitable. And it also, I think it stemmed from the fact that the CEO came from the client side. He was a marketing manager from various different companies, which kind of then this kind of point of discussion also leads me to kind of an interesting question that I'd be interested to hear the answer to, as to how it plays out in the US. Because I found different countries and HR managers and hiring managers in general, they have a slight bias in terms of people's previous experience when putting them forward for roles, for new positions. How, in your opinion, okay, you jumped from agency side to client side. That one, it can be done, I think, all over the world. But I also noticed that on your LinkedIn profile and in your background, you've also jumped sectors, from the education sector to the software development sector. And I'm not sure if that was also B2B, jumping from B2B to B to B2C, or the other way around. But how do you find that HR managers are they open-minded as far as understanding the principles of marketing and that these are transferable across different various sectors? Or are they quite close-minded and in thinking, okay, if you've worked at Coca-Cola, then you're a perfect candidate for Pepsi, as opposed to, I don't know, Nike or something else?
Yeah. There's a bias, but here's the thing, and this is a truism, I think, of any role, even beyond marketing, is if you're reliant on that HR manager to get in the door, it's always going to be hard to get past that initial gatekeeper. HR managers, hiring managers, talent managers have incredibly challenging jobs, because think about it from their perspective. They have to be experts in every different department and every different category within an organization. And they have to make a spot decision on whether or not you could potentially be a fit for their organization. So they're going to fall back on a variety of different constructs to or indicators to figure out whether you're a fit or not. Are you in the same category? Do you have relevant experience? All of the kind of traditional things that are going to make it harder for somebody trying to make some kind of transition to get past that gateway. So the question then becomes, how do we do an end around? How do we get past that? And the key and what's worked for me is having a network that is on the other side of that fence. So knowing somebody who can vouch for you in an organization and say, hey, I know you don't have any B2B experience, but you're a smart marketer. The things that you've done over here, I think, transcend. And I think we should take a look at you from that standpoint. And so that person can help shepherd you into the organization and through that process. So I think that's number one. Number two, for me, it's what's enabled me to work in B2B, B2C, B2B2C, B2C to B2B, like all the different combinations and across different sectors. One is that agency foundation. I needed to get in and understand a client's business as quickly as possible. And I had multiple accounts at multiple different agencies. So like adopting a consultant's mindset of going in and saying, okay, how do I get smart about this category and industry and know enough to be able to talk the talk, at least. And then from there, get deeper. The second part is not relying on a rote playbook, if you will, but rather over the years I've developed and acquired a number of different frameworks where I can look at a situation and say, hey, in this particular category, let's say it's for-profit education, this may work here, and this may work in one country, but it's not necessarily going to work in another country. Let me grab this other framework from this other category that may apply in South Africa. But that didn't translate to how we launched a school in India. So I needed to pull in a different framework and a different strategy, and not being stuck in just having one way of doing things, but being able to be a student of marketing and a student of business, and then use your network to kind of get past that HR.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And I think similarly, I agree on all fronts in terms of that ability to be a student, and I'd even add to say to borrow from previous experience with ideas that you've picked up in another industry that you can just use in a new industry where they've become somewhat jaded and boring, using the same old tactics and the same old tricks. From my perspective, I remember working in retail for many years as a brand manager. And then I got a job as a marketing and communications consultant at a medical insurance company. And I brought in some ideas and some tricks from the retail side that I put into the medical insurance company. And they were just so, overwhelmed and surprised. And, I got so many plaudits and recognition for some of the ideas that I was bringing. But I was literally just taking ideas from a different industry and just putting them here.
Yes, and here's the magic of what you did there is, even though you went from a retail sector to medical insurance, like at the end of the day, we're humans talking to humans, and if you keep that in mind, and we may be selling a widget or a service, but it's how we as humans buy and sell and communicate with each other. There's commonalities across that, and there's a tendency to kind of put on blinders or say, hey, I'm doing B2B, so I just need to focus on the business side of it. Yes, there may be multiple decision makers in a process, but those are all humans. Talk to people as humans. And I think that was kind of the aha moment that your colleagues and the organization had, was you brought over this way of thinking that treated people like people. And it worked because it broke through and it treated somebody like they wanted to be treated. And it probably opened up some doors and sparked some conversation and improved sales in the bottom line. So awesome.
100%. Now, I mean, I think everybody possibly has a different way of working. And I've not asked enough marketers this question, and it'll be interesting to ask this of a marketer that is in a different country, different environment. What is your process when developing a marketing strategy or marketing plan? How do you go about that?
So I do two things. One, different from my agency days where we would start with, okay, what's the objective? And let's just like create some cool stuff. So I approach it from the top down and the bottom up. And what I mean by that is I want to know what the objective is of the organization, whether, if I'm running marketing within the organization, what's our objective? What's our goal? What's our OKR for the year for this particular initiative? Let's start there. Then that's the top part. Then I want to know what's the outcome that we're looking for. Is it, going back to your agency head example of, how are sales, like what's the sales goal for this initiative? What are we going to be measured against? And it's not leads. It's not, MQLs. It's not opportunities. It's the way we're going to keep the lights on is we need to sell something. We need to make revenue. So what is that target? Now we've got, hey, we want to launch this new product and we need to sell 1,000 of them the rest of this year. So how are we going to go about doing that? And those two parameters help level set our go-to-market, we know who we have identified who we're targeting, but then it helps us figure out the different channels. So let's say it's, we identify our ICP, our target. What does a day in the life look like for them? What are the different channels that we can communicate to them? Where are they going to intersect our message? What makes sense at these different touch points? But then all of that's going to build and lead toward ultimately what is that sales outcome that we're measuring on the back end. And those two parameters kind of provide the guardrails that help say, hey, we could potentially do this, or we might not be able to do that because we can't, we could run an ad during the World Cup. But sure, that sounds like a great idea. It would potentially reach our audience, but we don't have the funds for that. We need to do something scrappy. So can we go to this event well, we can't afford to have a big booth there, but what are some of the other things that we could do to be creative, to reach our audience? And so that helps kind of guide and create a space for innovation and execution for that strategy. So does that make sense? So
Yes, 100%. I think it's also somewhat a slightly unfair question, I guess, in the sense being that I think there's probably a lot more because in a short space of time within a podcast, you can't really go into drill down into detail because I think there's probably a lot more that one probably goes through
yeah,
in terms of being able to really pull through all the elements that one needs to get to develop a strategy. And it also depends on what's in front of you, what's been given to you.
yeah.
What's the life cycle of the business? Is it the business that you're selling? Is it a particular product or service, et cetera, et cetera? So I
And it's,
do.
yeah, and it's the other thing is we're going to test a bunch of things. We're going to, throw a bunch of pasta against the wall and see what sticks, and not everything's going to stick. So we need to be able to figure out what's working and be able to iterate and learn quickly off of that. And I think that's, it's easy to, put together a great presentation and strategic document and say, this is what we're going to do and execute for the year. But, there's a heat wave in Southern Europe, or a drought, or COVID, or a global pandemic, any number of supply chain challenges, any number of things could, externalities could influence or impact that brilliant strategy that you put together. And so you need to be able to be nimble and flexible within that. And so that's why going back to my framework conversation, like having those guardrails kind of helps, even as you're having to evolve and iterate, helps kind of keep that plan on the track, and going in the right direction, no matter what comes at you.
100%. As an experienced marketer who's been in the industry for some time now, what do you see as the biggest shift in marketing in the last few years since you started marketing? What have you seen as the biggest shift, generally speaking, as far as trends, technology, et cetera, et cetera?
I think the role of metrics and marketing having an understanding or a contribution to the bottom line. And what I mean by that is there are, there are marketers who continue to be successful because they find ways to continue to add value and contribute to the bottom line. And there are those who just focus on just doing the marketing piece and don't really pay attention to, or haven't cracked the nut in terms of their contribution to their organization. And I think that's given, or part of the reason why there's a rise of the CRO, the Chief Revenue Officer. And I think that's a bit of a reaction to marketing not having eyes on the bottom line and that contribution. And so, going back to how I think about building a marketing strategy, you got to know what that outcome is. You got to know, what ultimately you're delivering, and the better job marketing does in saying, hey, this is the sales target. As a marketer, I want to own that as well. I want to be responsible and accountable for that. And that's been the biggest shift is, particularly during times of economic slowdowns or challenges, the marketing teams, the marketing leaders who can figure out how to continue to own that number for better or worse are the ones who will continue to be successful. There's always new technologies. There's always new things kind of coming in, and you got to stay abreast of those. But at the end of the day, if you want to have, a lengthy career in this side of the business, you got to find a way to add value. And, as you and I have talked about in this conversation, the more, whether you're in the agency side or the client side or the company side, being able to add value and contribute to that bottom line is job one.
100%, 100%. And because it is the hot topic right now, and I'm sure we could even, and I presume we're more or less around about the same age. We've probably seen several shifts, and we could go all the way back to the advent of this social media and digital marketing, et cetera. But I guess the more hot topic right now is ChatGPT and AI.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you've looked into this and how you see that play into the marketing space, and how marketers can possibly embrace and use it to essentially do their job.
Yeah, you picking up on what you just said, you hit the nail on the head with the word embrace. I think as marketers, we need to embrace it, but embrace it not as a threat and not as a crutch, but as a tool to help us do our jobs better, faster, smarter. There's a lot. One of the biggest challenges of marketing is we're asked to do a lot of different things and do a lot of different things really, really well, particularly as you advance in your career. You start out as a specialist in one area, and then as you become a leader, you start to pick up other areas that might not be in your wheelhouse. But your ability to understand and broaden your skill set is important. And AI and ChatGPT are another tool in that arsenal that can help you think through something, whether it's analyzing the SEO of a page, or you wrote a piece of content, check it over, see if there's are there improvements that can be made, doing a variety of different things to kind of run through some stuff, but using it as a sounding board. It's not the end all be all. It's not going to do the work for you. And if you're relying upon it to do that, shame on you. Come out and say it. But if you're using it as a tool, the more you understand how to use it, how to make it your friend, the better off you're going to be, because it'll be legislated. There'll be things that, parameters put around some of the stuff, but it's not going away. The genie's out of the bottle, and you gotta, the sooner you figure out how to make it work for you, the better off you're going to be in the rest of your career.
Question, and I mean, I couldn't agree more. Marketing Unpacked, we also just had an article that was posted pretty much saying exactly what you're saying, which is that it is a tool. And I think that's the key word that people need to remember, that it is a tool. It does not think for itself laterally, and you still have to have a human being, a clever marketer, to know how to channel this tool and what it can do, and the various elements that come with it, to create something that will resonate with the customer. And as you've touched on, it all boils down to sales yet again. So it may be well and good that you created an ad with ChatGPT. You had it write the script, you had it do the voiceover, you had it edit the video, you had it do multiple things across the board. But did it result in sales, and was it something that could resonate with them? And I think, it's still early days. Perhaps it will get to a point where it is clever enough to think laterally and think of, clever little gimmicky ideas that will, become that could become viral and sell a product. But at this point, I don't think it's quite there yet. But I think, like I say, it still needs a human being to kind of point it in the right direction.
Yeah, so I think, one of the fundamental things, and I've spent some time trying to really understand um, AI, and I read this book. I think it's called Genius Makers, and it's the story of AI. ChatGPT did not just appear overnight, but it's been in the works for 10 plus years, and there's been this kind of epic. The players have been duking it out for years. It's a fascinating read, and well worth anyone's time, kind of, that really wants to understand what's going on behind AI. But it needs input, and it's only going to be as smart as the information we give it. Even, it can learn a bunch of stuff, but it still needs that input. And so even today, what separates us from the AI is that original thought. And going back to marketing, it's our brand stories, it's our origin stories, it's that, what defines us as a brand, what defines our organizations. And as long as we continue to own that and maybe give ChatGPT or some of the other AI tools some of those inputs, then it can help us do a myriad of things with it. But we need to come up with those origin stories, those brand stories, and be able to tell and craft those, because those continue to stand the test of time. And ChatGPT, like some of the other tools that you referenced from our past, it can be just another bright shiny object, and our challenge as marketers is not to let it be that, but to let it be a tool that can help us do our jobs better. So I could continue.
And I think that on marketing, because specifically with my background, having been in South Africa, which is kind of, there are a few countries which sit in that kind of somewhere between first world and third world, the second world countries, where it's great training, where as a marketer you have to be in touch with the top end kind of things. I say top end, the kind of the digital technology, the digital revolution, things which are progressive technologies that are there to engage with potential customers. But you also have to still be in touch with, or at least have an open mind to, what other ways can you still engage with potential customers, if not actual customers, when technology is not at your disposal. So I think it's a great training ground for marketers, where somebody says, okay, well, you are in the financial services company, we're doing money transfers, but the majority of people here don't have Facebook and don't have Twitter and don't have any of that. They just have mostly GSM phones and a few with smartphones. How are you going to market to these people who may at best have a radio, but certainly not a TV? And it's a great training ground for people. So if
110%, the best thing that happened to me in my career was during my tenure at Apollo Global, where we were rolling out schools in a bunch of different developing countries and just other locales around the globe. And it was extremely humbling, because but as a marketer, it forced me to get back to basics. And to your very point, like, one of the schools I worked on was in South Africa. And we took over this, we bought a school in South Africa, and they had built their program, their distance learning program, by sending out packages. And part of my job was to kind of evolve the go-to-market and our motion there and see what we could do to digitize it and make things more efficient. But at the end of the day, to your point, you need to understand the constraints of any given market, any given country, and whether it's the type of devices that people have, or the bandwidth of their cellular services, or in lots of places, home internet is not a guarantee that most people's interaction with your brand may be on the small screen on their phone. So what is that experience like, and how do you boil down your message, your go-to-market strategy, how you're executing things to fit on a small screen or no screen at all? And so it's everyone should go through that experience.
Yeah, and it because I think a lot of marketers have kind of ended up leaning on this crutch, which is digital, and they forget that at the end of the day, you still want to just engage with a customer. Yes, you are engaging with them on a digital tool, but you need to be able to engage with a customer across the board. I think if you want to be a well-rounded marketer, whether it's in person, through a promotion, TV, digital, above the line, through the line, below the line, you need to be able to engage and, encourage them, have a compelling encouragement as to why they need to buy this product or service.
Exactly.
So, moving on to your career in itself, when we look back as human beings in general, distilling that down to as in your career and as a marketer, are there any decisions that you think that when you look back on in terms of your specific career trajectory and how you've ended up where you are there any decisions that you wish you could go back and change a decision that you've made specifically in terms of your career, and what was that decision and what would you have done differently?
Yeah,
as opposed to an actual in-job mess up. I mean, that happens every now and again.
Yeah, no,
an actual strategic career move.
Yeah, I think there are things, and I think the thing that continues to serve me well are two things. One, continuing to network. When I started my career, it was a horrible market, and I had to, I pounded the pavement and I talked to a lot of people and knocked on a lot of doors. But the people I met and the process and learning that I went through, yes, it ultimately got me my first job, but that network and that process helped me 2, 3, 4 jobs down the road in terms of the people I knew and what I learned about different agencies and different markets and whatnot. The other thing beyond network that served me well is I like to ask myself when I'm evaluating an opportunity one question, and that question is, what's next? It's not about that particular job, but is there something within that particular job that opens up a door, an opportunity for what's after that? Because we can become very short-sighted on, hey, I need a job right now, or I need income, or hey, I want this particular title, and maybe that's the answer to what's next. Maybe that's what opens up some opportunity for you. But failing to ask yourself that question kind of backs you into a corner. And I arrived at that because the second job I had, I made a mistake, and I learned a lot. I thought I was making the right decision, but I did not ask enough questions, and I did not ask that one question in particular. And it took me, nearly a year to kind of recover from that and find a better next job, a better learning ground. And I've tried since then not to kind of repeat that mistake. But inevitably, opportunities, roles, positions, organizations don't work out necessarily the way you want them to. But what I've found is, as long as I know what that what's next thing is, it helps guide me through that. And maybe it's this opportunity is a means to an end for that next role, that next thing that I'm going to do.
Yeah, I mean, yet again, possibly also an unfair question, because everything is great in hindsight, that you can have this you can have this a better perspective on a decision that you've made. But at the end of the day, all of these experiences are part of the learning.
Yeah.
But at the same time, from what I can see in my experience, I also have made several errors in judgment, but I think those were very early on in my career. Everything after, say, the second or the third job was, I had to do what I had to do,
Yeah.
because sometimes that was the best opportunity at that moment, and you made the best call, as far as whether you to take the job, to take the promotion, to leave the job. You made the best call in given the circumstances. But I think very early on, I probably would have made some slightly different decisions, because I had you sometimes make a decision based on financial pressures, but I probably would have waited a little bit longer, because I could have afforded to wait a little bit longer for something that made more sense at the time. So I think that's one thing that I would say.
And I think another angle to it is, whether it's some of the work that you're doing with folks right now, those are maybe learning points or jumping off points to other things, and you've kind of evolved into doing some of that work, or launching this podcast. 6, 12, 24 months ago, 5 years ago, you might not have decided to do this, but this could be a very rewarding and fruitful experience for you that opens up a myriad of other opportunities and things that you would not have imagined. But you arrived at the decision to do this because of X, Y, and Z, and X, Y, and Z might not have been present for you or top of mind for you, at an earlier point in your life or your career. So I think it's managing our careers is a ongoing challenge, but something that we need to kind of be open to and be able to kind of understand, how things are going to bob and weave. And that's why I like the what's next kind of question, because it's like keeps me kind of thinking forward. So anyway.
100%, and I completely agree with that. And I think I've used that maybe subconsciously. I've also been using that paradigm in terms of the way that I've tried to choose my roles. Kind of coming to the end of our discussion, we've chosen these careers that I think we both love, but at the same time, there must be certain things that you dislike about the role, or they could be. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but are there any things that you dislike about marketing, or at least the career, the field of marketing?
Yeah. So I'm gonna do a little juxtaposition for you. So I think what I like best about it is marketing at its best can and should touch every part of an organization. And that's what I love about it. But the flip side of it is, because it touches every part of an organization, because it has so many different forms and fashions or facets, like, product development or sales or customer service, those are clearly defined roles. Marketing is much more amorphous and broad, but because of that, I feel like everyone thinks that it's easy. Everyone thinks that they can do it, and it's not. And but because it comes across as it's easy, or it's not sales, or it's not customer service, or it's not, because it's amorphous, it's often one of the first things cut. Yet it's arguably one of the most important, because it's the glue that holds all the other things together. And that's the blessing and the curse of marketing and these careers that you and I have chosen.
I probably couldn't have said it even any better myself. I think, that's kind of how I would say I feel about it as well, if I would ask the same question, and especially that part about everyone thinks that they can do it, because these days a lot of people can just slap that onto their kind of job title, marketing manager, head of marketing. I'm a marketing strategist, and you look at their career path, and you look at what they've studied, and you're like, I don't see how this adds up. I don't see where the marketing side. Okay, you've got a Facebook account, you've got an Instagram account, you've got a few hundred.
I found
followers.
I found a marketing related chat GPT prompt, and I just dumped it in there, and I created this amazing strategy that chat GPT spit out. So now I'm a marketer.
Exactly. It's truly unbelievable, and very frustrating at times. Very, very frustrating.
Yeah.
But
well, it reemphasizes the importance of making sure that you're adding value, developing a personal brand, and knowing kind of who you are, and using that to kind of guide your career. So,
yeah. A la Gary Vaynerchuk, who I think has been a real master at that, I think.
Yes, very much so.
Indeed. Andy, thank you very, very much. We've enjoyed having you on. You've given us some great insight, and it's been great, hearing your perspectives on marketing and your career. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you. I've enjoyed it, and good luck to you and your listeners.
Thank you so much.
Follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn to get updates on thought-provoking marketing news and views. Marketing Unpacked, deeper brand and marketing insights.